I'm always speaking to anybody and everybody, but I hope that those people who don't understand the concept of white privilege, I hope that they get something from this little story I'm about to tell, because I think it might align with them, because I think I've had an insane amount of privileges in my life of various degree. And, understanding where your privilege comes from and why it is what it is important. It's necessary for the empathy that you and I are both calling for people to have. So I grew up in a little beach town with very, very few black people. Very few people of any color. And that was no one's fault, right? That was not because my family was racist. That was just where I ended up growing up. And for many years of my life, I was simply not exposed to various cultures and various types of people. And I mean, if not for my dad being the chef, he is different food, everything. It was a homogenized kind of community. Not that there's anything wrong with that or anything good about that. It just was what it was. Right. And so I actually didn't have any black friends until college.
Wow.
Because there just weren't any black people around.
Right.
And imagine that. If you tell that story to people who grew up in cities or more diverse areas who have, had friends of whatever race for their entire life, then they're just like, what? I can't even imagine that in my mind. But the way I understood racism for the first 18 years of my life was, that's old. That's slavery. Like, that's not the way the world is anymore. Black people and white people are equal, and everyone loves each other. And that's the world. That's my world, right? Because I didn't know any better.
Right.
Then I came to UF, and of course, that's where we became boys. Mm-hmm. And things started happening. And the biggest one was Trayvon Martin. And I think that was 2012.
That's crazy.
It was our sophomore year. Mm-hmm. Because I remember the day that the protests at UF were happening for Trayvon Martin. Mm-hmm. And this is the first time 19 years old, academically successful by the standard metrics, took AP classes in high school, whatever, all that shit. 19 years old, this is the first time I'm ever confronted with the topic, like really directly, where it's put in my face that someone was killed because they were black in the modern era. And of course, Trayvon Martin happened in Orlando. It was in Florida, as our home place, our home state. And what blew my mind about that, and I remember the day I walked around the protests at where the potato is in the middle of UF campus. And I remember thinking, this is really historic. Like, I'm living through a historic moment. And then, I started to hear and read about the case, and it just didn't make sense to me. It was like, well, wait a minute. Like, and this was kind of like my young future lawyer logic brain kicking in, like, right. Where are the facts? Like, there's no way. How could it be? Like, how could it be that this guy just killed this kid because he was black in the wrong neighborhood? Like, it didn't I could not physically comprehend it because of the way I was raised, the way I was educated. And again, none of that was with malice. Right. It's simply the way things were. And the world was painted to me to be a good, equal place. And I remember during the whole trial, during everything, it was like, it took me time to understand it, because my entire life I had been taught that that's not the way the world works. Yeah. And I, being a kind of good person, I think, didn't want to think, like, I didn't want to accept that. Like, there's no way. Because, like, I would never do that.
Yeah.
Like, even remotely. Like, how could someone do that? Like, what kind of humanity does this person have?
Right.
And no one had ever taught me, and I had never seen people do that kind of shit. Because where I grew up, there were no cops beating people up. There was none of that. I didn't see it. And then two very important things happened. One is a really funny story, and one is not. But one is that I was walking home late from something on campus, a party or a gathering or something, and I walked past a bus stop, and it was dark, late. Probably had been drinking to some extent. I remember the night, and I don't remember being drunk. I was with it enough. And I remember, and this is going to be the funniest thing, I remember it's the first time ever in my entire life, it took 18, 19 years, for someone on the street to say something crude to me. I was walking past a bus stop, and a chick hollered at me in a very crude way. I love that you're laughing, thank God. Because I laugh when I think about this all the time. But this is how privileged I was, is that it took 19 years for the first time for someone to holler at me strange on the street. In my town, I mean, everyone drove everywhere. People were like these little beach Florida people. Like it was not an environment where things like that would happen.
Right. And
it happened. And for like the entire walk home, I was so upset. I felt so violated. And I was like, that is so wrong. Like, how could she say that? Like, it's 2 a.m. and it's dark. And like, I don't want to hear that. Now keep in mind, I'm like a bro. Like I'm a dude. Yeah. I'm a straight dude. You would think, I would love to get hollered at by a girl at night on a college campus. That's what every guy wants. Yeah. But dude, it freaked me out. And I will never forget that moment because it has never escaped me. Because then when I talked to people and I listened to the stories of, UF has a very strong community of all different affinity groups. And the black group at UF, the group of black students overall and the groups that they are in are very vocal, which is wonderful because people need to hear those things. And people need to be exposed to that. And they need to, more importantly, be able to express it. But I remember then I started hearing stories and I started hearing them differently. And I started hearing people say things like you said about how you talk to someone if you pass them on the street or how you move away. And I went from being physically unable to comprehend it by no one's fault, simply by the circumstances I was in, to now having a touchstone of my own experience where I go, yeah, that was horrible. And wait a minute, that happens to you every time you leave your house? You're telling me that every time you go to work, you're afraid and you experience people saying things to you on the street like that? And that was when it clicked. Because then I thought, holy shit, man. That happened to me once, and I was outraged. It ruined my whole night. And then it's like, God, imagine having your day ruined every time you leave your house. Imagine fearing that. Imagine going to your workplace and fearing that. And it's legitimate because it happens. And that was a turning point for me. And then what sealed the deal was Eric Garner. Because there is no missing facts.
Right.
Like there's no way your privilege or your brain or your ego can watch that and say, oh, but there might be some reason, like maybe he pulled a gun first.
Maybe he resisted.
Like, Right. Maybe he was part of a gang. Maybe, like, we don't know. Like, you're like searching in the dark, like, because you don't want to accept this is real. Yeah. And you just watch it. And I cried like a baby. And that was what did it for me. That was how I became part of this. That was how, I evolved. I grew to understand race better. How I grew to understand racial issues better. How I grew to understand how I grew empathy. All it took was one experience and one video. And what I don't understand is how people can continue to see these videos over and over and over and not begin to question, why doesn't this impact me?